I just got the little notification.
All right. So I am Natalie Shaquan. I'm an undergrad at UChicago studying astrophysics and English. And today we're going to do a little interview of Dr. Nagy. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Johanna. I'm a faculty member at Washington University in St. Louis, and I work on instrumentation for microwave telescopes.
Awesome. Could you give me like a quick summary of your research and what you're working on right now?
Sure. So for the CMBS-4 project, so CMBS-4 is the next generation of telescopes that we're hoping to build, and they'll be both at the South Pole and in the Atacama Desert in Chile. And so specifically for CMBS-4, I've been working on our large aperture telescopes. So we have two different types. We have large aperture telescopes and small aperture telescopes. And as the name suggests, the large ones have the bigger mirrors, so it gives us better resolution on the sky. So I've been thinking a lot about how to calibrate those telescopes and how to also how to be able to test our detector modules. Those are basically like the telescope cameras.
Very cool. So what is the most challenging aspect of what you're working on right now?
Yeah, so CMBS-4 as kind of the next generation experiment is a much bigger project than I'm used to working on. And I think that many of us in the field are used to working on. So the way that we make our telescope more sensitive than anything we've built before is to have many, many more detectors. And so they're separated into what we call many, many more receivers, which are all basically the lenses that focus the light onto our detectors. And so we're scaling up everything that we've done before. And so a big challenge is just the scale that's involved in this project and figuring out how we're going to be able to scale up what we've been doing by factors of tens or more.
So what does that involve, the whole scaling up process?
Yeah, so in a lot of cases, well, I'm an instrumentalist, so I do a lot of work with the actual hardware, with putting these telescopes together. So it's everything from turning screws to gluing different things together. And so something that's kind of special to me about these telescopes is that we don't just go out to a company and buy a complete telescope. We actually have to build them up piece by piece. And a lot of these things are kind of handmade in our labs. Our research groups, which are undergraduates, graduate students, some postdocs and research scientists and faculty members. And so we're very used to doing these things where we kind of build things by hand and we only have to do it once or twice. And so then it's just, there's a lot of, I guess, care that goes into that process, and it might take a long time, but you don't have to think about how long it's going to take to make many, many copies of something or how to actually scale it up, because once you do it once, you're pretty much done. And so a big challenge here is thinking about sort of the level of work that has already gone into current generation experiments, and then how much more we're going to have to figure out how to do it more efficiently and how to be better about actually testing what we make to be able to kind of standardize our components a little more.
Yeah, so just like repeating everything on just a much larger scale and trying to build on all of the previous work.
That's right. And sometimes too, like you might make one copy of a certain telescope part, and then you test it and you find, oh, maybe it doesn't work quite exactly as you want it to work. So then you go make another one and maybe that one works better. But we have to kind of take into account almost the failure rate of our components, or what we call the overall yield, and figure out like, well, if we need this many of a certain component, how many are we actually going to have to make to get that? And how can we improve our yield?
Trial and error on just a huge scale.
Yeah, yeah.
So what is the most rewarding part of your work? What makes you excited?
Yeah. So with this instrument, certainly the science that we're going to be able to do with this instrument is going to be incredible. So the idea of being able to measure these things, to learn about the universe, things that we don't know right now. So that's incredibly exciting. And that's what's really driving us to do all of this work. So that's, of course, something that's really exciting to think about. And kind of on the hard days, I always just think about like where I hope that we're going to be in 10 years when we have this on-sky data and we're poring over all of the information and learning about the universe. But I think on kind of a more personal level, one of the more rewarding things actually about this project is that we're working with much larger teams than we're used to working with. So a lot of the experiments that are on the sky right now were built by smaller teams, and there are many different telescopes on the sky. And so this project in particular is about all these people coming together and really sharing what they've learned from their experiments so that we can take all of that knowledge and use it to build a better telescope. And so it's really fun to see science being done in this super collaborative way.
That's awesome. So I know you've told us a little bit about your work as an instrumentalist and like how you kind of do a lot of different jobs, but what would a regular day of work look like for you?
Yeah, well, I
If there's
guess,
such a thing.
yeah, one of the things I like is that my days tend to be very different depending on what stage of the project we're in, or even for sort of different sub projects, what's going on a particular day. So I personally, I like to spend as much time in the lab as possible. So as a faculty member, unfortunately, that happens less and less than it did than say when I was a graduate student. But certainly, even when I can't be in the lab, like turning the screws myself, certainly a big fraction of my time is spent talking to students who are working in my group and talking about their projects and how they're going and kind of what the next steps are. Um, of course, even before the pandemic, I think as scientists, we spend a lot of time on Zoom, on meetings. And part of that is just we have these collaborations that are people from different institutions all across the country and all across the world. And so, like realistically, we check in with each other at least once a week. And this is for various sub projects. So typically on any given day, I'll have many meetings with different groups of scientists working on different projects. And so I do spend a number of hours a day on Zoom. Yeah, and then otherwise, I mean, other kinds of activities I guess I would do in a typical day for research would be things like looking at papers that different groups have put out. So taking a look at what other people have done and thinking about how that relates to our instrument. And I guess a lot of it is, checking email, that sort of thing. But then, and when we return to kind of in-person travel, I guess, or they're like on sort of exceptional days, sometimes we'll have full meetings where we all get together and discuss things. And we still do that now. They're just on Zoom all day.
What is it like working on with a collaboration on such a massive scale? I mean, it's kind of an unusually huge international project.
Yeah, that's right. So I would say that we're certainly having to make a lot of changes in terms of just the administrative tools that we use to keep track of things. And luckily we have, with a project this scale, we have a lot of administrators who can actually help us along. So with the smaller projects, on some level, the scientists have to serve more as the administrators, which to be honest, a lot of scientists don't love that aspect of the job. They would much rather be in the lab turning screws. And so it is really helpful to have people who can serve and kind of project management type roles or administrative type roles to help us out. But at the same time, there are a lot of kind of standardized software tools that we need to use to keep track of different parts of the project. And we have to be more diligent about organizing things. So even if we have some internal memo that we write, we need to make sure it goes in the right place, in the right folder, so that people can find it when they need it.
Lots of redirecting and all of that.
Right.
Keep everything organized. So is there a particular memory or moment in this project or in your research career in general that just stands out to you?
Well, so I would say CMBS4 is being built on sort of the experience of previous generation projects. So to me right now, because CMBS4 is so new, a lot of the moments that stand out to me are related to actually those previous generation projects. So I've worked on a balloon-borne telescope called Spider that has been looking at the CMB. And so a lot of the moments that I think about is being really fun would be things like when the telescope actually launches, or when you start to see the data coming back and it looks really great. And, all the things that I had nightmares about didn't actually come true, that sort of thing. But I think there are other kind of smaller moments like that where you see like preliminary test data, or for me, like when I'm working on something in the lab and maybe it's been a project that has had a lot of challenges and all of a sudden it works. That's always really rewarding.
So for Spider, did you actually get to go to the South Pole or?
Yeah, so Spider launches from Antarctica. There's a balloon base at the McMurdo station. And so, yeah, for the launch, basically, I was down there for about 3 months, just getting the instrument ready and then staying through launch and through the flight, which is a couple weeks.
Yeah. Can you tell me what that was like?
Yeah, and this is where it's really similar to for the people who are traveling to ground-based telescopes. So like we will be eventually doing for CMBS 4 at the South Pole. Um, so for getting to Antarctica, it takes kind of a long time. So you can take commercial plane flights down to New Zealand. Those are long flights, but there you can just buy plane tickets, anyone can go. But to actually get to Antarctica, we can't take commercial flights. We take U.S. military flights, basically. And so and there's once you get to New Zealand, um, there's basically a special center where you go check in, and they give you what's called extreme cold weather gear. So they give you a big red parka and snow boots and snow pants, so you don't have to worry about buying clothes for these very cold temperatures that you'll never use back north. Um, and of course, we always kind of complain about commercial flight delays and uncertainty due to weather and stuff. But in terms of like actually getting on the flights to Antarctica, you're really at the mercy of the weather. And so sometimes you can be waiting a very long time for your actual flight to get down there. So I think I got lucky in that when I was down there for Spider's Flight, I was only delayed by a couple of days. But there was a backlog of people who had been delayed for more than a week just because the weather down there had been particularly bad. And of course, the logistics of operating the stations in Antarctica are pretty challenging. And so um, obviously certain cargo and certain people doing certain jobs have to be prioritized.
Mhm.
And so even once planes start flying again after bad weather, it takes a little while for kind of the backlog to clear. But yeah, then once you get to the station, it's kind of like living in a college dorm. So there's basically the housing is very dorm-like. So there's like you have a room at McMurdo, you have a roommate, and then you eat your meals in basically a dining hall where they do have staff who do the cooking, which is actually kind of nice because sometimes like you don't have to cook for yourself for a while, and there's just a buffet of food that's ready at meal times. You show up and you eat it. So that part's nice because you don't even have to plan about what to bring down. But yeah, scientifically, it's a little bit tricky because when we're working in the labs in North America, we're used to if we need some kind of supplies or something for the lab, we just order it or we know where to get it. But when we deploy telescopes to sites that are very remote, usually you can't just get like next day orders from the internet or anything. And so you have to think really hard about the cargo. You have to think really hard about what spare components you need to bring with you in case something breaks during shipping or in case there's some problem. And generally we have to pack up all of the supplies, but also all of the tools that we need to put things together and everything we need in case something goes wrong. There are huge amounts of cargo and we have to start planning way in advance.
Very cool. I have to ask, being a college student, how good is the dining hall food?
So the chef positions down there are actually very competitive because people see it as this once in a lifetime opportunity to go down to a place that they wouldn't otherwise get to visit. So the chefs are incredible, and they're working with very bad ingredients because, as you can imagine, it can be difficult to get fresh food in and out, particularly fresh produce. So they're using a lot of very shelf stable foods or frozen foods, but they're very good chefs, so they can do great things with that. And
Oh,
they're cooking for a lot of people, but especially for meals like holiday meals and stuff, they really go all out. So I really enjoyed the food when I was there.
that's really cool. Almost sounds like one of those cooking shows.
Yeah.
So moving kind of like more broad scale, what got you interested in astrophysics? Like what drew you to this field?
Yeah. So I think, well, I guess I'm young enough that I remember like being in middle school and actually seeing pictures from the Hubble Space Telescope and seeing them kind of on my classroom walls. And at first I would see pictures of these nebula and stuff. And I didn't think at first that they were in space. I thought there was something like under the ocean. And so when I found out that they were actually in the sky, it blew my mind because you can see all these things that they don't look like necessarily what you see when you just look up with your eyes. And so I got really interested in kind of like the idea that there are all of these things up there that we could point telescopes at, we could just go find. And so I just got really into space and then wanted to know more. I did think when I was, I guess, in high school that I really wanted to be a theorist. So I wasn't so interested in like the technology behind the telescopes themselves. I just wanted to kind of learn about the universe. And I didn't think that I necessarily liked building hardware. But then when I was an undergraduate, I took a class that was hands-on. I actually loved it. And so then I did a summer research project where I worked in a lab and found that it was just a whole lot of fun. And so kind of, I just kept doing it.
Very cool. So I guess you've been interested in this for since middle school almost.
Mm-hmm.
So was this what you wanted to do when you grew up?
When I was really little, I wanted to be a paleontologist and study dinosaurs. And then I kind of realized at some point that I didn't actually like digging in the dirt that much. So I think for a long time I knew I wanted to be some kind of scientist. I wanted to like go out and find things that people didn't know before. But like the kind of science has definitely evolved over time.
Very cool. So kind of outside of the lab and like outside of research, what do you like to do?
I really like animals a lot. So I have a dog and two cats, and I'm almost impressed that they haven't shown up in this interview yet. But so yeah, I spend a lot of time with my animals, love exploring new parks with my dog, hanging out, that sort of thing.
Very, very cool. All right. I think that's just about all of the questions I have. Is there anything else you would like to talk about or like to bring up?
I think you covered a lot of stuff here. So I think you got everything that I can think of.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming. And thank you and have a good day.
Yeah, you're welcome. And you too.